Not yet this year.
How are they?
Okay, so I get emails from you.
Well, you got the agenda from me.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how to reply to the agendas. Well, sometimes I do. You're probably in the group mail. I'm sure I've emailed you.
I don't think you've emailed me, but I have emailed you the agenda, but I think that's the only thing I've ever sent out this year to the planning commission.
Makes sense. So they were talking about the parking lot, by the old, what was that place? Oregon City used to be in.
Right, and then somehow after that, then as they went through the construction plans and the engineering.
Overhead service line, so
I don't know how it happened, but that went away and it became a.
I would just say there is an overhead service line for how
Okay, we'll call to order the Monday, April 8th, 2019 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is public comments on any items not on our agenda. Are there any public comments? No cards? Okay, we'll move right on to the public hearing then. If anyone wants to see what I'm about to read in written form, it's available on the counter at the back. One public hearing on a land use application is scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the commissioners whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the commissioners have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any commissioner about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. Hearing procedure steps are shown in the chart behind Mr. Lewis. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of the final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster board, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Okay, now we will open the public hearing for Oregon City file number GLUA-19-0001. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare? And has any commissioner visited the site? Commissioner Mahoney.
I drive by it occasionally, but and I'm familiar with the site, but I have no conflict of interest.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson.
I drove by the site because I've been up and down Molalla, but at 30 miles an hour, you don't get to see too much of the details, so I did swing through and look at a gravel parking lot and try to figure out what's what, and got the faces down and satisfied with that, and have no ex parte contact.
Okay. Commissioner Stoll.
I drive past 221 Molalla many times a week. I drove past 202 Molalla a couple times this week just to take a glance at it at 20 miles an hour, but other than that, no.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer.
I've been there many times. I have not been there this week in preparation for this, but I know the parking lot well. I have not seen the the proposed parking lot in question, but I have a good idea of where it's at. I don't see any issues with it. And no ex parte contact. I did meet a couple of the people in the lobby, but we didn't talk about anything.
Okay. Commissioner Gage?
No ex parte contact, and I've driven by, but not stopped there. So.
Okay. And I have visited the site, and I have no ex parte contacts. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the commissioners about the statements that they just made? Okay, we'll now go with the planning staff report. Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I'm gonna try to turn our projector on. Thank you. My name is Kelly Reed. I'm a planner with the City of Oregon City. I'm here tonight to give you a staff report and recommendation for file number GLUA 19-00001, including a parking adjustment, minor petition, and site plan design review. I'm going to attempt to be brief, but also thorough, so good luck to me. We've received a request for a parking adjustment to exceed the maximum off-street parking allowance for the commercial building at 221 Malala Avenue, along with a minor petition to divide 202 Malala Avenue into two 5,000 square foot parcels and a new 10-space parking lot on one of those new parcels with access from Myrtle Street. And I think you all can probably see where my cursor is here. The commercial building at 221 Malala, has existing parking in front of it. There's also a parking lot across the street that serves the building. And then the new parking lot is proposed across the street. There's an existing single-family home on the property. The partition would divide that in half, and the parking lot would be built back portion of that property. The partition application and the site plan design review for the parking lot would typically be handled at a staff level review, a type 2 application. The parking adjustment request is the type 3 application, and because those are combined, they all get reviewed together by the Planning Commission as a type 3 application. My staff report focuses on the parking adjustment because that's the Planning Commission level review. If you have questions about the partition and the site plan design review, I'm happy to answer them, but I'm not going to focus on those in this presentation. And full disclosure, the planning office used to be located in the building at 221 Malala Avenue. So this property, along with the commercial building and all the parking lots that we're talking about tonight, are in the mixed use corridor 1 zoning district. We do anticipate future redevelopment along Malala Avenue within the mixed use corridor zone. This zone allows up to 3 stories, 3-story buildings, and a large variety of uses. It's currently not quite developed like that, but we do anticipate over time that the corridor will be redeveloped with mixed use development. And so a little bit of background on the commercial building itself at 221 Malala. This was a former Copeland lumber business. The building was converted to a mixed-use building in 2005. SP 0518 is the land use file number for that approval. It was originally constructed with 79 parking spaces, the parking in front of the building and then the parking across Pearl Avenue. And then an additional 16 spaces were leased by the landlord after the original approval. So today, there are 95 total parking spaces provided between the 79 and the 16. And over time, the tenants in the building have changed. It has gained more office uses and fewer retail uses. And it's also been internally rearranged to create additional leasable areas from when it was originally approved. And so the parking lot is proposed on this parcel here. The existing single-family home is proposed to remain. There's a fence along the property line and the property to the north, the apartments that's proposed to be removed and replaced. And then the new parking lot would be accessed from Myrtle Street, which is currently partially built.
What did you say about the existing apartments along the property line? You said.
We'll need you to come forward and ask that question so that you can be heard on the microphone for the record.
Okay.
But I can repeat that.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. That's
There's an existing fence here, and the proposal is to replace that with a wood fence. Okay, and the site plan for the partition and the parking lot shown here, you can see that new property line would be kind of straight down the middle with 10 spaces, a little bit of landscaping, and two-way access from Myrtle Street. There's another version. And then I wanted to share, before we talk about the parking adjustment, I wanted to share a little bit about our parking requirements in Chapter 1752. So Chapter 1752 contains minimum and maximum parking requirements based on uses and square footage. So the table below, you can see the retail minimum is 4.1, that's per 1,000 square feet of net leasable area, and then a maximum of 5. Office is 2.7 with a maximum of 3.33. We have a long list of uses in that table that I'm not showing you tonight because it's not relevant to tonight's application. But they're mostly based on the square footage of the building and the use. And it's not based on any other factors like the number of people in a building, for example. In this chapter, we allow on-street parking spaces to be counted towards the minimum required for any particular development if they're on the frontage of that property. So if the on-street spaces are across the street or down the street, they can't be counted, but the ones on the frontage can be. Shared parking also may be utilized to meet the parking requirements. And the code at a type 2 level, at staff level, allows for small reductions in parking requirements when there is proximity to public transit, when there's a transportation demand management program that encourages alternative modes, or when there's efforts around tree protection. So we do allow some reductions at a staff level, and if the request is for a larger reduction or going above the maximum, as in this case, then it's a type 3 planning commission level review. And the parking adjustment, we adopted this code in 2013 after the adoption of our transportation system plan. Overall, the transportation system plan sought to encourage and promote walking, biking, transit, carpooling. And so it also led to us to write in the ability for people to request larger parking adjustments. The code was written with reductions in parking in mind, and so if you read through that code, you notice that a lot of it was more geared towards that. It was showing that there's a lot of on-street parking available in the area. In this case, a lot of that doesn't really apply, but I'll kind of talk about how we do apply that code to this situation. So the parking adjustment code says we can grant adjustments when the use is extraordinary or unique, or in the case of reductions where existing infrastructure and development patterns can accommodate development with less parking. So today we've got 101 spaces currently allowed based on the current retail and office mix within the building at 221 Malala. And the applicant is requesting the ability to provide up to 107 parking spaces.
So an adjustment of 6
That's correct.
additional.
6 above the maximum. And so while we staff did not find that the use was extraordinary in this case, it's like any other office building. There are people that come to work, different users. Our parking ratio seems to work for other office buildings. However, we do find that this situation can be considered unique, which is the other end of the parking adjustment. The reason for that is that the building, it's in the mixed use zone. It is a building that was designed for a mix of uses. It has ground floor retail storefronts, and because of that, we think that this parking adjustment is appropriate. Our code does not have a parking ratio for mixed use. We just have office, retail, and other land use categories. So because this building has in the past seen greater retail uses within it, and currently it doesn't have quite as much, we think that in the future, it's very reasonable to assume that additional spaces in this building could be converted to retail, which would then allow for greater parking by right. And so we considered a few different scenarios. In 2005, for example, 9,255 square feet of the building was retail space. Today, it has gone down to 2,480 square feet. We considered scenarios in which this is the ground floor floor plan of the building. So let's see if we can get my mouse here. There we go. So only 2 of these tenant spaces are currently retail. We considered a scenario where these 4 were retail, and then where the entire ground floor on the front half of the building was retail. And that ended up, scenario A was where the 4 tenant spaces are retail, 106 spaces would be allowed by right. And in scenario B, 113 spaces would be allowed by right. So the request for 107 parking spaces, falls within that realm, and we found that to be reasonable. And so we recommend approval with conditions, and those conditions include a vehicular barrier at the eastern edge of the parking lot, right here, so that the users do in fact enter from Myrtle Street and don't utilize neighboring property. Conditions include improvements for Myrtle Street, including sidewalks, street trees in the driveway, and pavement to bring Myrtle Street improvements up to the property. There's a condition for stormwater line replacement, and then also access easements between the 2 partitioned properties for pedestrian access and vehicular access, and then access easements between the property and neighboring properties in the future when redevelopment occurs. There are other conditions that are mostly standard. I'm happy to answer questions about them, but I'm not going to go into detail. And I do want to apologize, there is an error. The staff report had a condition of approval that said error not found. And what that was supposed to say is the development shall comply with all current Oregon City Public Works design standards, specifications, codes, and policies. And that was tied to page 53 in the staff report, which also shows an error, that same error language. And so I'm asking the planning commission's, if the planning commission makes a motion to approve, that the motion include an amendment to condition number 2 and page 53 of the staff report to revise that to this language. And I'm open for questions. I know the applicant has a similar presentation as well.
Any questions from the commissioners at this point?
I had a question. The 107 spaces, does that include street parking? Or that's just the parking spaces? in the
It
parking
doesn't
lots?
include any of the street parking that,
Okay.
our code allows the applicant to include street parking if they want to, but they aren't required to count any of those street parking spaces.
Okay, and why is there a maximum number of parking spaces?
Yeah, so
What's the
our,
purpose of that?
generally, I think the market provides what is necessary, and we see that usually. But we have, we put a cap on it because we don't want to see parking lots built for example, Black Friday shopping day, where, the parking lot's full, where the rest of the year, it's a quarter full. So it's about efficient use of land, it's about encouraging alternative modes of transportation, and it's about not paving over vast swaths of land to provide parking lots that are only necessary 2 days out of the year.
Okay,
That's
makes sense, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, at this point, we'll have testimony from the presentation from the applicant, up to 15 minutes.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Parrish Burns. I'm a planner with Harper Hoff Peterson McGillis. I'm also joined here by Mike Robertson.
My mailing address is 1211 Southwest Fifth Avenue, Portland, or Suite 1900, Portland 97204.
Harper Hoff's offices are 205 Southeast Spokane Street, Suite 200 in Portland, Oregon, 97202. I'm here representing the property owner and the applicant, demonstrating how the project complies with the standards and approval criteria for the applications that Kelly just reviewed for you. The first slide is site context, which was presented by staff, showing that it's Molalla Avenue and that there's actually 3 parcels associated with this project, the 202 and the 221. The property on the outline of the property on the south is the surface parking lot currently for the office building that has reserved parking spaces for employees. There's 56 there. And then there's 27 visitor spaces directly in front of the building, and then 16 leased spaces across the street. So with the 10 parking spaces that are proposed with the partition, that would bring the project up to 105 parking spaces. This is a view of the partition that's been shown previously. The proposal currently retains the existing house that's proposed on the east parcel, parcel 2. And there is a modification requested for the landscaping along the shared property line, which would be the east property line of proposed parcel 1, in order to enable a 10th parking space. The 5-foot landscaping buffer made it challenging to be able to accommodate 10 parking spaces on that parcel. Here's just one more slide of the landscaping proposed. So the adjustment for landscaping, the blue line is highlighted along the east property line there. And the project is actually still proposing the same amount of trees that would otherwise be required for perimeter landscaping. The 2 trees that would be required along the east property line have been reallocated. So the north and south property lines of that parking lot have an additional tree allocated. And then the evergreen shrubs that are proposed along the perimeter, it's a selection of hardy low-maintenance native plant materials, primarily 3 to 5 feet in height, which exceeds the minimum 30-inch requirement. So there's a level of robustness of landscaping to help offset the elimination of landscaping along the east property line there. This slide shows where the parking stalls are located that have been reviewed already. The first bullet point on this slide does have a typo. There's 95 existing parking spaces, not 97, and 101 are allowed, as Kelly outlined. The office building is currently, doesn't have any vacant tenant spaces, and so there's currently 167 employees on site. And 2 of those tenants have really frequent weekly meetings and trainings in which up to 70 people off-site also come. So we're talking about on a given day of a week, there may be up to 237 people. So the need for at least 107 parking spaces is pretty well established. The new parking lot will give them 105 spaces, and the adjustment is requesting 107 to enable them to have the opportunity that if there is the ability to utilize leasing 2 more parking spaces or developing 2 more parking spaces in the future, that they don't have to come back for another adjustment. It's something that's been considered and hopefully approved under this meeting. This floor plan is something that Kelly has already reviewed in her space, so it shows that in the future, if those storefronts on the ground floor tend to turn over and become retail again, that the site would actually be allowed to have more spaces by right. This slide had 112, and it's really just a difference in rounding from the 112.5, whether you round up or round down. So because of this, we feel that the likelihood that retail could cycle through in the future is quite likely, and the adjustment request for 100 spaces seems reasonable because of the flux of retail uses that can happen over time. The final few slides, we just wanted to highlight some of the approval criteria and standards for the different applications that have been submitted here. The partition standards, the proposal complies with the minimum lot sizes and dimensions and configuration standards of the code. It's capable of future redivision. It can accommodate utility easements, like the 10-foot easements that are currently conditioned for the street frontages of both of those parcels. And then the public facility standards are met. There's street improvements happening on Myrtle to extend the paving of that street and do the curb and gutter. And then there's pervious pavers that are utilized for the parking stalls themselves to mitigate the need for on-site stormwater facilities. The landscaping modification criteria, we believe the project equally or better meets the intention of the shading parking lot standards to soften the edges and retain the same existing quantities of trees in that situation, along with robust perimeter landscaping on all the other property sides. We're meeting or exceeding the landscaping standard for overall for the site and the minimum landscaping for the parking area. And then the 5-foot perimeter landscaping along all the other edges is maintained, and it's actually a little wider on the side frontage along Myrtle Street. For site plan and design review, the parking lot is an allowed use as an accessory use in this zone. We are exceeding the minimum landscaping requirement. The site's been designed with the grading and stormwater conformance with city standards, and the Myrtle Street improvements and pedestrian easement will be established. And then the parking adjustment criteria, the parking study that was done basically noted that the off-street parking occupancy average was 91%, and industry standard basically finds that anything that's over 85% typically reflects an insufficient amount of parking. The neighborhood benefit is that it reduces the on-street parking demand that's happening on residential streets. And then there's no anticipated safety impacts and no increases in trips generated by the proposal of this parking lot. This is parking, people are already driving there and using the site. It's not intending new users. It's people that are currently parking on the residential streets, getting them to have a space off street to be able to park. And it's not going to impact public service connections. The project was presented to the Barclay Hills Neighborhood Association. It was their meeting on November 13th, 2018. It was well received by community members. They expressed full support for the proposal to create more on-site parking and reduce the overflow parking on the residential streets. And we didn't receive any objections during that presentation. Finally, we agree with the recommended approval that staff has and their findings in the report. The exceptions are the conditions of number 15 and 22. We have some concerns with the way that the conditions are written and the extent at which undergrounding of utility lines are currently written in that report, and the burden of the easement over parcel 1, which would basically be 40% of that property width. Right now, as written, it could potentially preclude the ability of that parking lot to be able to be converted into something that's buildable land with a building on it when you have such a large easement placed over it. So Mike Robertson's here to speak a little bit more to the concerns that the applicant has about the conditions.
Hi, Chair Mitchell, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mike Robinson. I gave you my address. I'm a land use attorney with the firm of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt. So I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant. I wanted to talk about conditions of approval 15 and 22. So let me start with 15. I think John Lewis gave you a two-sided updated staff report for condition of approval 15. Do you have that before you?
It's being circulated down.
Okay.
Oh, nobody else has it?
No.
Yeah, they don't have copies.
Okay.
So
Speed reading.
I think our original concern with 15 was that it would require the applicant to underground all of the overhead lines along Malala Avenue, parallel to Malala Avenue. If I understand John's clarification on condition of approval 15 correctly, it's only the service line from the overhead utility lines to the house. Is that correct, John? Right. Okay. And I should say, by the way, let me back up just a moment, Chair Mitchell. After we talk and then you hear public testimony, we'll have an opportunity for rebuttal. We'll tell you then whether we want to continue the hearing, but I think we'd like to get a sense of what folks have to say about the application and also maybe hear a little more from you about these conditions. But I want to be clear on the record, according to John Lewis, 15 is modified, or let's say it's clarified to make clear that only the service line from the overhead utilities to the house is what's required to be overheaded, or undergrounded rather. If this applicant were burdened with the obligation to underground those utilities, we'd certainly object to the condition because, as you know, it's both expensive and you don't control the timing of it. PGE does. So I think that's what we have to say about 15 right now. Let me talk about condition of approval 22. That's on page 4 of the staff reports. There are 3 different easement requirements. The first is a temporary pedestrian easement. It's replaced or removed at the time of future development of parcel 2. I don't think, Parrish, we have an objection to that one?
No.
Okay. So the last 2 bullet points under conditional approval 15 were the ones that I think the applicant had a concern about. And if we can work our way through these, we certainly wouldn't have a reason to continue the hearing. The bottom bullet point, the third easement requirement under conditional approval 22 is a future condition. We don't have an obligation to record that easement now in order to comply with the conditions of approval for this decision. But I think Parrish's point is that it's going to burden, are we concerned about the third bullet point as well, Parrish?
Potentially, because there's a potential for 212, the development to the south, to be able to have a requirement to utilize ingress and egress through this new property, right? Through that easement that's proposed.
So we want to talk that through, Chair Mitchell. And then the middle condition was the one that I was at least initially concerned about, but let me make sure I understand how it's intended to read. This one is a vehicular reciprocal access easement between proposed parcels 1 and 2. Kelly, can you put that back up for us, please?
Here.
Yeah, so the second bullet point of condition 22 requires a reciprocal access easement for vehicles between 1 and 2. As a practical matter, until parcel 2 is redeveloped, the only way you're going to go is out to Myrtle Avenue. I don't think the intent, there's not enough room between the side property lines and that house to get a driveway out. You're going to have pedestrian access on the south side of the house, but not a driveway access. And you've got a condition requiring the barrier that's shown in red so folks couldn't drive over there anyway. So there's not an issue of folks driving to Malala Avenue from parcel 1, which is what the condition is intended to provide. we were concerned, one of the concerns we had was whether this easement, once you record it, it runs with the property. And so unless you're thoughtful about it, you're going to preclude the redevelopment of that property. But I want to make sure that that the planning department agrees with our read of this. The last sentence under the second bullet point says, quote, "The easement document shall contain language to clarify that the easements can be revised in the event of future development patterns that are not compatible with easement locations." So what we would suggest is we write the easement documents to allow those easements to either be modified or terminated based on what the future development patterns are. In other words, if the parking lot on parcel 1 eventually goes away in the future, you'd want to release the reciprocal access easement so you could use that. If, depending on how parcel 2 is developed, you don't want the easement to inhibit the redevelopment of parcel 2 because it's an existing single-family home. I think Kelly said the sense is that it's going to develop eventually as something else, which would be expected on Molalla. So as long as we're all in agreement on what that last sentence means, I'm not sure we have a problem with that. But I want to be clear that the easement document could be written to allow for either a modification or a termination of the easements on both of those properties. And then I think what we'd like to do is allow the applicant to hear the public testimony, let us chat for a moment, and it may be that we don't have any additional concerns. If we do, Chair Mitchell, we'd probably ask for a 2-week continuance of the public hearing so we can figure out how to deal with them by working with your staff. That's all I have for tonight. If you have questions for Parrish or me, please ask them, and we agree with the staff report recommendation for approval.
Except for those two that you brought up.
We're taking those under advisement right now.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I know I'm late, sorry.
Oh, speaking of that, before we go on, let's get on the record. Do you have any ex parte contacts to declare, and have you visited the site?
Nope.
No to both?
Yep.
Okay.
Nope, yeah, no.
Thank you.
My question was what just got passed to us by John, that memo. Is that something, I didn't really understand it. We were trying to read it very quickly, and I don't understand the impact of that with this since I just saw it tonight for the first time.
We have copies of it, but it's basically an acknowledgement that we're not, I think the staff report was clear, but we clarified even further that
what we call the long lines or the transmission lines that run parallel with Molalla Avenue is not something that we're asking this developer to convert to underground, even though our code requires utility conversion from overhead to undergrounding. So if you've noticed along Molalla Avenue, there's an abundant amount of utilities that are in some cases on both sides of the roadway. That's not what we're asking this developer to put underground. What we are asking this developer to put underground is the service lines that cross Molalla. They can either put them underground in Molalla or they can feed them by way of Myrtle.
Okay. Now, is that according to the code that we have, or is that something that's critical for the city? I mean, is that something worth
The code
continuing
doesn't
this?
differentiate between service lines or the main trunk lines. It says all lines.
Okay.
So we're clarifying that.
Okay. I was a little
Because we think
confused.
that the
Sorry.
effort to put all of those lines underground would be complicated by much longer distances and is really not feasible for a project that's 50 feet wide.
So, okay, I was trying to follow what's on that piece of paper, what you had written, and listening to Mike, and I was trying to figure out how does this all fit together as he's saying it. That's not
the same thing.
Okay.
Chair Mitchell, may I add something?
Sure.
So thank you, Commissioner Gao, for the question. It's a good question. When we read the staff report, and page 46 of the staff report addresses the code standard for undergrounding, it wasn't clear to us that in fact the lines parallel to Molalla Avenue didn't have to be undergrounded. And so John was good enough to provide a clarification. And based on what he just told you, the only obligation of the applicant under conditional approval 15 is to underground the service line that runs perpendicular to the lines on Molalla. And John's absolutely right. It would be, I hesitate to use this word, but silly to obligate undergrounding of those very expensive and complicated lines for a house that's not even going away yet. Okay. So we appreciate the clarification, John, and I wanted to make sure that you knew that this document was before you and was part of the record.
So you accept his letter?
Let us talk to the applicant, Commissioner Gao, but I think this is headed in the right direction. I certainly don't have the same concern that I did at the beginning of the evening but I want to make sure the applicant, who is my boss, is comfortable with that.
Sorry, I was just trying to clarify, trying to read that and listen to you at the same time.
Well, it's tough to listen to me, I understand that, I appreciate that.
For years, I'm
Yeah.
kidding.
No, but thank you for the question, I thought it was a good and appropriate question.
I got a question. Why are we talking about undergrounding service lines on a piece of property that on parcel 1, which is part of the application, when it doesn't front on Molalla Avenue? Am I misunderstanding something here?
The undergrounding will, it's the only, the undergrounding we're talking about is a service line to parcel 2, not parcel 1.
And where's that
Go to this house.
So if you drew, I'm sorry, Commissioner Mahoney, if you drew a line between where Kelly's got the arrow, that's the undergrounding. But I thought perhaps you were going to ask, why would you require undergrounding of a house that may go away in the future? It's a reasonable question to ask.
You're running a service line from Molalla Avenue back to parcel number 2, right?
I don't believe so. It's a parking lot. I don't think do we have any additional utilities back there?
There aren't any improvements.
What about
that I'm
lighting?
aware
Are
of.
you gonna have lighting? Is that gonna have any overhead lighting?
In the parking lot,
Yeah.
lighting is not proposed in the parking lot.
It's not.
It's primarily parking that's going to be used during office hours, during the day. It's not going to be something that's really utilized in the evening.
So what the condition, Commissioner Mahoney, obligates the applicant to do is to underground an existing overhead service line to that house. And I think the reason, just to be open, the reason that the applicant was concerned about this is that house is likely to go away in the future. So why spend the money to underground? Even, we don't know exactly what it's going to cost, but why spend the money to underground it? Why not just wait until the house goes away and then you would underground the service line with the new development? That was, I think that's what was generating the applicant's
What I'm
concern
getting
about
at is,
condition 15.
This parcel number 2 isn't even part of the application, right?
No, it is both.
Well, it's one parcel now.
Yes.
Part of what we're being asked to decide is divided into 2. So before the division is done, it's one piece of property, and our code requires that be undergrounded.
There is no change happening to the house at this point. There's nothing in the proposal that
Right.
alters the house, and there's nothing in the proposal that does street frontage improvements on Molalla Avenue. So nothing's happening on that side of the proposal at this point in time.
Any other questions at this point?
That's creating a question in my mind that I just have to ask.
Okay.
The proposal on lot 2 is simply to divide the original lot into 2 components.
Correct.
And thereafter, this application does nothing to lot 2. No effect on lot 2, or I shouldn't say effect, but nothing proposed to be changed on lot 2.
That is correct.
Yeah, what Parrish's presentation showed is there are 3 applications before you: the parking adjustment, the design review for the parking lot, and the partition that takes one lot and creates 2 parcels. And you're absolutely right. Once we divide the parcel, that's the last time anybody's thinking about the house on parcel 2. All the activity is focused on constructing that parking lot.
So my question then may be, what brings up the underground powers to the house on parcel 2 when it's not?
Right, so my take on that is it's a partition, right? And so under that, we reviewed all the code provisions that apply to that partition, one of which is undergrounding. And in my view of that, it's also this effort that we've got overhead utilities that the city has an objective to try to get undergrounded, right? Now, in some cases that makes sense. In other cases, in this case, we don't think it makes sense in all cases. That's the long lines that run up and down. But in this case, it helps eliminate that overhead pollution that crosses Molalla Avenue. And because we're having a partition here, we have that opportunity to clean up that piece of overhead utility and put it underground. Or the other option would be to abandon it there and serve it from Myrtle. There's options, I'm sure. We don't know all the details of that, but That's our objective, is to follow the code to the degree we can. And because it's a partition, it gives us that authority to make those kind of decisions, as long as they're proportional. And in this case, we think they're proportional.
And I understand that, but the current house is not being used, as I understand.
I have no idea.
Well, no, it's being used as a single-family residence. That's what the staff report
Oh,
says.
is it
Yes.
occupied?
No, it's vacant.
Okay, hang on. If you want to make a comment, you have to come forth and
Wait until.
get on the record. Thank you.
So the staff report reflects that the use is a single-family dwelling, but we're not proposing to remove or otherwise do anything to the house.
Change the house.
Yeah.
So the issue, John has been around this far longer than I have, and I appreciate his explanation on it. And so it clears up in my mind now what it is. You're trying to just make it as current as you can without a whole lot of.
Right, I mean, those changes aren't gonna change how that house is served. There's, unless they move it by way of Myrtle, which they could. I think that's really gonna depend on the utilities to make a determination. Our objective is to get those crossings underground.
Who takes on the expense of the undergrounding of those services, John? Is it the city or?
It's the applicant and the owner.
Oh.
Developer, the team, the delivery team, it's not the city.
Okay, okay. Gotcha.
Is this power supplied from the opposite side of the street or the same side?
I don't know all the details of that. I'll have to, I got this question 15 minutes before your meeting tonight, so I don't know all the details of that, but I suspect it's probably, most of the utilities run on the opposite side of the street. So if you drive down Malala, that's where most of the overhead lines are. There may be there's also a pole in front of them, but I don't know what's on which poles. And what I saw was a variety of utility lines that cross at a variety of different locations.
So you're not sure which side of Malala?
No,
They have to go.
I'm not today. I'm not
So,
today.
Chair Mitchell, may I say one other thing before we complete the applicant's presentation? So if our preference would be that condition not be required, and the only by the way, I appreciate John putting in the clarification. That was very helpful. He did that at the last moment, and we appreciate it. But if you think about it, as Commissioner Johnson pointed out, the only reason we're even talking about this little house is because it's on the lot that we're partitioning. It's not going to go away. It's not going to be redeveloped. Now, we think it might cost just for the service line maybe $15,000, but that, until I said that, that's not in the record. We don't know how much it's going to cost, and it's really up to PGE, not us. If they say it costs $30,000, then it costs $30,000. It's their call. So I appreciate what John had to say, but given the equities of this, it seems that the better time to even require this undergrounding would wait for the redevelopment of that house. Because that's, I think, when the city would require, if there are utility lines on this side, to be undergrounded. So we would prefer the condition of approval 15 not be imposed. I think there's a better argument for not requiring the undergrounding. But if the Planning Commission requires condition of approval 15, I just wanted to make sure that the commission understood the clarification offered by John, which is that it's just the service line. So thank you for your time, Mr.
So I need a little bit more clarification from John. I know I was late. I have to say that I live by this property almost every day, but I never really look at it. But I drive up and down Malala all the time. Malala, John, are the lines underground ahead of the street and below the street, or is it just that we're requiring it in this section of Malala? Do you know if they're, before you get to this area, if they're underground and they're underground after that area? You know what I'm asking?
This is an old section of Malala. There's a lot of utility crossings that exist along Malala Avenue. And so this would be probably one of the few that would be required to go, that would have been required, because we've not seen land use developments happen. Right?
So we're not sure if it's on the same street as the development, and we're not sure if there's wires ahead and behind.
No, we're sure it's on the same street.
We're sure it's on the same street.
I don't know if it's on their side or.
But the side is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's overhead wires on both sides of Malala at that point.
And so you're just
then
not sure
there's
which
wires
ones.
that come out from
Right.
Malala.
And my
to the
other
house.
question was, is there before that street and after that street, are they underground or is it just in that area we want that?
It's throughout
I
the
would
city.
say
we want.
throughout the city, we've got overhead crossings.
As you get on more development, then you're asking for that to be
Right.
done. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
the
just trying to
objective is
clarify.
to clean up overhead crossings, and I'm not sure, maybe Bill, you can answer this, but is there a nexus for requiring undergrounding after the partitions happened?
Well, so the city has made a policy choice that it wants underground utilities. And what it says is anytime there's development happening, we're gonna require those utilities be undergrounded. There is a nexus for doing that for the development because subdivision and partitions are considered development in the city. And this is somewhat unusual in that you have a 2-lot partition as opposed to, let's think about a typical, you've got a 20 acres out on the edge of town, you've got an old farmhouse and someone is gonna put in, 80 new houses. I don't know if the math works or not. We require underground utilities and we would expect all the utilities for that entire thing to be done underground in all the new houses as well as the old house. This is our chance to get at that. The difference here is that we've got one small thing and the only use going is on the other one. At the same time, the fact that they're partitioning is development for both lots, both parcels. And so in fact, we can look at and deal with this at this time. And that's a policy choice the city has made is we want these things undergrounded and, it's gonna be a long time before we see the main trunk lines undergrounded. I think that'd have to be a major investment, but we can start chipping away as things come in because that house may well go away and something else comes in and we can do it then. Or that house may stay there as a residential development for decades. We just don't know.
I have a question on top of that. As far as the city putting utilities underground, they put in utility vaults, they put in big conduits. Would they be required, if that was a requirement, to put in the utility vaults, municipal size conduits? Would they have to put in the infrastructure that the city would normally put in?
No, we're not.
Or would they just, directional bore a line underneath the street?
So the city doesn't put in utility vaults, that's the franchise utilities that do that kind of work. So good question. For the most part, the city puts in water, sewer, wastewater, and storm. And to add to that, for private development, if it's private development driven, it's the developer who builds those facilities for us. But the kind of things that you're talking about, like PGE lines, Northwest Natural Gas lines, cable, those are all done as a condition of the development. And they're not built by the city.
Would they be considered a development then? Would they have to, by code, put that type of infrastructure in?
If this didn't have utilities as close as it does, right? If they had to bring, if in order to serve this, they had to bring power to it, they would have to build that. The city would not provide that for them. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
So part of my question also following up with that in mind. So Mr. Robinson brought up the fact that it might be PGE's responsibility. I heard him say whether PGE should.
Typically PGE is going to do a lot of the service work for them and build them.
So this would come back on the developer. What I'm asking is, does that homeowner ever get under the gun that they're gonna be responsible for any payment for this since they're in the first lot? You know what I'm asking? They're parcel one, there's parcel 2, and the parcel 1's behind them. Is there any way that those people with that residence on there in parcel 2 could be charged for any part of this underground?
Right now, we see, there's one property with one property owner, they're asking to split it into 2, and so that property as a whole is encumbered with whatever the condition requires.
So parcel 2.
If they wanna, they own the property as one, it's just one right now until we approve the partition and there's 2, so we don't allocate the
So they're
cost.
not buying half the lot?
They can't sell it yet because we're creating it to be 2 separate ones, so it's one person.
So did that clarify? It's the developer who's doing parcel 1 that would be ultimately responsible for or is parcel 2 at all?
It's the same owner?
I wouldn't worry about
Oh, the same
that.
owner? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I hope they don't get stuck with the payments for this.
Okay, at this point, is there authorized representative of a neighborhood association or government agency or other incorporated public interest organization? All right, seeing none, then we'll move on to testimony from individuals. You have 3 minutes each. Ms. Reed, we have cards? One card? Okay, if anybody else wishes to speak, please turn in a card. First person, Tracy Hamblett. Please come up.
Hello, my name is Tracy Hamblett. I live in Oregon City, and I am the property owner of all 3 properties around this. The Little Mexican Restaurant, the building that's currently under reconstruction from fire damage, and the house at 325 Pearl, which I believe is a typo in your staff report for the address. So our concern, as long as, you know, they fit all the requirements of the city and they want to develop it into their park, we don't have a problem with that. Our concern is that our properties access from Molalla, from Pearl, and from Myrtle. And so I'm not sure what's going to keep people from driving through our parking lot to get to theirs, because it's just easier to pull off of Molalla than to go all the way around Pearl Street and then down Myrtle Street and then back up. So when the landowner first approached us, he was telling us that the city was going to require a barrier along that south property line, which would make sense then, because they wouldn't be able to turn into that lot. At this time, along the south side of the house that's there, my understanding is there is enough width to drive back, to have a driveway, okay? So, so that would then keep the traffic flow from going back into that lot.
Do we have a pointer so we can make sure, so you can show us and make sure where we're talking about?
Yeah, we're trying to follow on the map here. It's not marked clearly where Pearl Street is, so that's what we're trying to figure out.
Pearl Street isn't on the map, it's just south.
Right, and also in your, I submitted a little map in the packet. I don't know if you guys have that, but I've put down on there the addresses so you can see 212. You can see the corner, which is 220, which is of the corner of Molalla and Pearl. And then the house at 325 Pearl.
Do we have that map?
There it is.
Okay.
You should, it's in, we submitted it.
So
Yes.
it's the 3 lots directly south of 202, is that correct?
It's those right there, which, yeah.
Thank you.
So like I said, we have access to those 3 lots. We share parking, and we have access from all 3 streets. So I'm just concerned about if there isn't a barrier that's put along their property line for the whole entire property line, that people are going to come into our parking lot anyway. We have, I don't know if you know this area very well, but we have a lot of unauthorized parking that goes on in that lot. We are continually having to monitor that. People have been told that they can park there by various other people, and they really can't, and we do lease parking out. So having that taken up, and that creates a hardship for my livelihood, to be able to have money from our property. So that would be my request for a consideration of a barrier, because I don't know how people are going to be directed to access it from Myrtle Street only. Does that make sense?
Yes. Can we go back to the map that shows the 2 parcels?
The one we were just looking at.
It's 7.
Or 17.
This one?
Yeah. And is there a pointer where you can show us where you're talking about this divider?
I don't have.
Do you want to use this?
Where to put the barrier?
Where the divider, where the barrier you are requesting would be.
Okay, so. Okay, so this is the property line, right? So this area, so I have a driveway that comes in right here, services this restaurant, okay? You go around, you go down here, you're gonna come back around and come through our property this way. This is Pearl down here. You can't see it, but it's Pearl. So this is Myrtle, and you can access from Myrtle into our property as well. Okay, so it's pretty open and large. So without a barrier here, I don't know what's gonna keep people from just driving in here and either going around back this way or parking where they're not supposed to park, or, any of that. So I see they have the proposed landscape for that one section, but it doesn't go all the way to Molalla Avenue.
So why would somebody come in
Because
and
there's,
want to go into parcel 2?
Because there's a driveway there. It's all open, it's all open.
But there's supposed to be a barrier between 1 and 2. So is that what you're concerned about, where those red dotted lines are, people driving in there?
Well, no, if a barrier goes there, even though it says temporary, I don't know what temporary means, that's gonna keep people from necessarily driving into parcel 1 from parcel 2, but that isn't gonna keep them from driving into our 212 lot, right? It can go all the way back out to access onto Myrtle Street or onto Pearl Street. We have people all the time that cut through Malala Avenue, cut through that parking lot to get onto Pearl Street. It's ridiculous.
So it says extruded curb line, but there's no curb there? You can drive through that?
Right. It's all gravel between the Mexican restaurant over to.
It's
the
paved.
Parcel 2. Well, it's in the back half of it, it's gravel, right?
Oh,
in the
right.
front, maybe some pavement.
There's some improvement, around all of those buildings. There you go.
So could you, with your little pointer again, show us?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, so this is the piece, right? This is the property line. Here's the driveway, comes right in here. Here's our parking. We lease this parking out, okay? Here's the restaurant, here's the house, and then here's the other building here. And we access right through here. We access right through here. We access right through here. So what's gonna keep people from turning in here? Oh, gee, I can't get through. Oh, I better go out here. I better go around and get in.
It is awkward.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody would do because it's like the least resistance. I mean, that's what you're gonna see. I don't know how you're gonna get people to, I mean, Myrtle Street is a narrow sort of side street that's not real obvious, and I know they're gonna improve it, and that's fantastic, but I'm not sure what is gonna keep people from going through our parking lot.
So these red box area, is there any way that that could be a long driveway into behind or into that area? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I think, so if you, there is room, my understanding is there's enough width beside the house to the south where the property line is.
The 202 house?
Yeah, that you can drive back there and then you'd be able to access it from there as well. If they put up a barrier between the two lots, that's gonna keep people from necessarily getting to that back lot, which is just gonna push them back out into our lot. Does that make
You're
sense?
suggesting the red line be a barrier of some sort, though people who drive that way rather than through your lot and up and around. That's what you're saying.
Well, now,
Still,
No.
okay.
It still can,
how would people know where that parking lot is? Because you can't really see it unless someone tells you that it's back there.
Right.
Because I thought the proposed use of this parking lot was for employees and not people looking for parking.
Right, but what I'm also telling you is that in that area, I mean, we lease spaces out, it doesn't matter. People come and park through there, people take their lunches there, people drop garbage there, people just come through there like nobody's business. And so,
It's part of having a parking lot.
Yeah.
right, except
okay.
that, so of course, you're right, absolutely. And so we have, load issues, maintenance issues, safety issues. I just don't want those to get worse by opening that up.
Is Ms. Hamlet required to have access to that property from both Malala and Myrtle?
Not required, no.
Okay. If this is such a problem and Myrtle is such a minor street, why do you have access to Myrtle?
Myrtle isn't really the problem. The problem is Pearl and Malala. Because people see they can turn into where the restaurant is and then just bomb through and get onto Pearl.
What I'm asking is, if that's the problem, why not block off your access to Myrtle? That would be a solution that you could do to solve this whole issue. But whether,
Oh, I see
regardless, yeah.
So you're saying to block off Myrtle Street so that people that turn into Malala will recognize that they can't get through.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Then to do an awkward U-turn.
Of course, that's putting the onus on her and not on the developer. The
Well,
developer should supply
but the
that.
onus is on her. Presently, people drive through anyway, right? So the onus is on the property owner to control their property anyhow.
This just seems like it would encourage it. I don't know.
It might. Okay.
Yeah, and so that would be my proposal, is to put a barrier all down the property line. It should cut that down. Another comment popped up from earlier discussion, and that had to do with the fact that they're not going to put any lighting in that parking lot. And even if that is, because we are making some improvements to our property with outside lighting for safety issues. And so I'm concerned that even though they're saying it's daytime use, we all know it's dark in the morning and dark at night during the winter months. And that's a pretty removed area to not have any
all across
safe.
the city that there's crime in dark areas. That's why the city blocks off some bluffs.
Yeah, so that might create a problem for safety for people.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Next is Donna Selman Pillarget.
Yes.
I probably murdered that, sorry.
That's okay. She's used to it, right?
So my name is Donna Selman Pillarget, and I'm a real estate agent. And to put to rest any idea that nothing is happening with that first lot there, lot 2, I have a very interested and very active buyer who was actually trying to buy the entire property and was told that it really can't be bought right now because of the fact that this is going on with trying to separate the lots. So my biggest concern is it will not be used as a residence with my buyer if finally we get freed up and are able to purchase it. It will be used for a light retail kind of usage, basically. Maybe a little bit of a music kind of coffee house kind of thing. I'm wondering, how many parking spaces will she have with this? Will she even be able to have people turn around? What will happen with that property if somebody actually wants to use it as a commercial business? That's my concern.
Parcel 2?
Parcel 2. Because from the pictures that I was seeing, it doesn't even look like there's enough room for somebody to turn around and park. Even if you put them, 3 or 4 parking spaces this way, going this way, behind the house, I don't see how they would even have a chance to pull around. I mean, what kind of effect is it going to have on somebody who potentially wants to buy it and use it as a commercial business?
They might not be able to.
Right.
Might not be suitable to use.
If someone, sorry to jump in.
No, it's fine.
If you would like to change from a residential use to a commercial use, you'll have to go through type 2 site
But
plan.
I think it's already a mixed use, isn't it?
The zone is mixed use, but you'll have to go through a type 2 site plan design review. Will assess parking and things like that.
Right. In other words, with this particular development, it probably would lessen the chance of that ever happening. That's my point.
Yeah, either way, they would still have to go through an analysis to figure out how they would serve the site with parking and things like that.
However, if it wasn't split off, that wouldn't be really a problem at all.
Exactly. That's what I keep thinking. We're changing the whole look of it now, and now you're gonna have to go through type 2,
Mr. Chairman?
which delays
Yes.
it down.
I've got a question.
Okay.
William?
Yes,
Are
Mr.
we on
Mahoney.
solid legal ground to be considering her comments based on it speculative?
You have an application in front of you. Sometimes property owners do things that you may not choose to do with their property. The question isn't whether you would choose to do it, whether you think it's smart, whether you think it's a brilliant idea. It's a question whether it meets the criteria. And the fact that, in some people's opinion, that this may really limit the uses of parcel 2 in the future doesn't mean the application doesn't meet the criteria.
I just wanted to make sure that we were heard.
No, I appreciate it. And,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that in mind, it's a commercial area, supposedly. It could be switched, MU. So if the parking lot or all that's changed, then even a residential, would they have problems with parking there? Or, you know what I'm saying? I'm looking right now, I go, what if they had it as a home?
They would have to design a parking lot to meet the standards. There's no parking lot now, it's residential.
But it can stay a house, it can stay residential.
It's currently,
Yeah.
That stays the same.
yeah.
Okay. Another comment from Elizabeth Lewis.
Yes, hi. Yeah, I'm interested in 202 Malala, and I want to know,
Please
is there really enough room, if that was to stay?
Start with your name and your city residence, please, for the record.
Elizabeth Lewis, and I live in Oregon City.
Thank you.
Okay, is there really enough room for a car to legally drive into this house in 202 after it's split? I mean, if you kept it as a residential, is there really legal room for a car to drive
That was kind
in
of
the
my
back?
question, yeah.
Or is it illegal? And that opens a whole nother can of worms.
I agree.
All right.
Okay.
That's your comment?
I want to know the answer to my question.
Well, is it not already a residential use with a driveway?
And they're already parking back there.
Is the driveway wide enough?
But I want to know, is it legal?
After the split.
So there's a couple of questions. It's a good question. To us, it triggers a lot of other questions. So one is the single family use. You can refer to the applicant on the legality of any easements that exist or not to get there and or park. For parking on single family properties, you can park wherever you like. We don't have minimum parking standards for single family homes in Oregon City. So you don't have to have any on-street, off-street, or on-site parking at the moment. But yeah, I'll have to defer to the applicant as far as any legality of any existing access ways or requirements. But right now, yeah, if they want to park in the back, they can park in the back. That would be fine.
Yeah, but the question I'm asking is when you come off of Molalla and you're driving into this driveway, is there really enough room? Is that a legal space, or am I intruding on this lady's property?
Yeah. You'll have to figure that out between property owners. It's not up to the city to review that as a part of this application.
The question you're asking is whether parcel 2, after it's created, is legal, given the difficulty reaching the back end of the parking.
That's right.
The assumption in that question is that there's a requirement for somebody to be able to drive into the back as to be a legal lot. And that just simply isn't an assumption that's warranted by our code. As Ms. Turway said, there is no requirement for off-street parking for residential uses. When this piece of property is split into 2 different parcels, parcel 2 remains legal as a residential use. How they park their cars is a question for them. If in fact they trespass on Ms. Hamlet's property, that's not something that the Planning Commission can regulate. Ms. Hamlet and the current owner can have a dispute about that. They may call police to enforce that, but that's not something the Planning Commission regulates. As it stands right now, when that parcel 2 is created, it complies with all aspects of the code.
Okay, the other question I have is regarding this temporary barrier between the split, the partition of parcel 1 and 2. If you can go back to this previous slide. It's down. Okay, so what exactly is a temporary barrier? What does that consist of?
We'll ask the applicant to discuss that in their rebuttal.
Okay, and then what does it mean by this required future easement?
Applicant answers that also.
I can answer that.
Is that something in your conditions of approval?
Yes, there's a condition of approval that the 2 new parcels, parcel 1 and parcel 2, provide an easement, reciprocal access easement to each other for future vehicular access. However, with the current proposal, we don't want vehicular access between those 2 parcels because we want the people that are parking in the parking lot to enter from Myrtle Street. So we've proposed a condition or recommended a condition of approval to have a barrier put up at the end of that parking lot so that people are obligated to then enter and exit it from Myrtle Street and not cross through any other properties.
So the required easement is what is required by your code, by your city planning code.
Our code requires access easements between properties to connect parking lots. And the future easement would be upon the redevelopment of 212 Molalla. If that is redeveloped in a way that allows for a connection of the proposed parking lot there with any new proposed parking lot for this new development at 212 Molalla, then those easements would then come into play, and those parking lots would then be connected.
So
The
Kelly,
parking
I'm
lots would
confused
be
as well.
connected.
I'm confused as well, just
Yeah,
listening to all this.
I am too.
All I keep saying is the required future easement, I show the arrow up and down.
Yeah.
But coming off Malala, is there an easement? Do they own parcel 2 also, as well as parcel 1? Did I miss that? The developer? Okay, so that house isn't owned by you yet, or it is?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Okay, so you could probably give an easement down that way to the back of the house. I mean, what good is a house without a parking? But that's my thought, but I understand your concerns.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing required future easement, but it's arrows up and down, not this way.
Look at the one in blue.
Yeah, there's a couple
makes sense.
easements there.
That's a barrier that says,
No, that's red.
With the required easement.
with the red.
The blue and the green.
For future development.
So there would be an easement between parcel 1, parcel 2, and then a future easement between parcel 2, and then that property to the
The one
south.
with the restaurant on it.
And then
Yes.
when that redevelops, we would get the connection.
So you
Between the
require
two.
connections between
We do,
different property owners?
we do, yeah.
So they could put one
That
there.
way people don't have to drive out on the street to come
Right, I
back.
didn't know you had to require property owners to allow.
Yeah.
We
access
do,
between-
yeah. It's in 1762-050A2G. And just for the record. And so, yes, but the tricky part is that we require them as property develops, so we may have only one half of it now, and then when the other property develops, then we get the other half and they have to sync up.
So if Denise was still here, she'd probably advise you to start working and talking to them about that easement possibility on that property to go behind the house.
So do I understand you correctly? You're basically saying that whoever buys parcel 202 Malala, will have to allow the proposed parking parcel, you have to allow cars to come in and out through this temporary barrier eventually will be removed.
It depends how the property develops. If parcel 2 built a parking lot in the rear, then you would have access through parcel 1 to your parking lot in the rear, and then you could have a parking lot as well. So the idea is that they'll eventually all connect up, but yes.
But it would still be private parking.
Yeah, you don't have to allow anyone to park on your property. It's just access to get there.
That's what I was wondering. Okay.
Right.
Sounded it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for helping us clarify.
Any additional public comment? Okay, we have 5 minutes for applicant rebuttal, and we'll let you go a little longer than that because some of the public comments went longer than that.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. But I have a request. Mike Robinson here on behalf of the applicant. I have a request before we begin our rebuttal. Would the commission mind taking a short break and letting us talk with our client about some of the issues we've heard? Then we'll come back and do our rebuttal. That might save us making a continuance request.
5 minutes?
I think that'll be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
First he took 2 minutes longer in the beginning. We already had it. I looked at this meeting mic on my phone, and the phone showed me all the meetings. It didn't go below the 7:30 meeting. It didn't show me this more.
Oh, didn't show you the 7 o'clock one?
And I thought, that was strange. Why would we have a meeting at 7:30?
7:30?
Good.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I'm in the land of Oz right now.
So it's
out that parking lot owners have to allow people to go through it.
No, 35 seconds left.
So she couldn't put up one fence up if she wanted to. Interesting. That's right. Well, not now, but in the future, if this becomes a parking lot, they have to allow access.
Here's that letter from John, guys.
Which is silly, because that means that they could. That doesn't even sound like it's a good fire code thing, but, so you could not have a driveway, and still have access to the parking lot. They can't prevent.
What's that?
Well, discussing out of the situation.
Oh, yeah, lots of issues make things.
This whole
Getting over sickness and things like that is pretty. Okay.
Do you know all these things, or do you always, Mike, do you already know all these things, or do you learn something every time you have a meeting? You still learn, you know everything?
Yeah, no, understand.
So when I run that other meeting, I'm gonna use that same sheet and follow the same suit as yours?
Yes.
Okay.
If there's a public hearing, I don't know what there is.
Okay.
They're the ones that are doing this.
And you have got that because it was in the back, or you have that already?
Laura gave that.
Oh,
But you could grab one in the back and figure out.
I think I will do that.
Right now, I think what is scheduled is just a work
They're
session.
the owners.
Oh,
And a work session is not a public hearing. It's only
Right.
a decision. But the city
Have they
commission,
always owned this?
the code review,
Mrs. Parrish?
I don't know.
Parrishburg.
they pushed 4 items back.
I'm losing track of the names.
That's the plan.
So that may change all of our
Ah,
schedule.
gotcha. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't think I caught her name.
Okay.
So these are back there right now, if I ran up and get one?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the back, and then it would be. Yeah, and that would, I mean, that's okay.
We have to postpone this meeting until the game is over.
Oh,
What's the latest?
what game?
1 point, 2 points.
Oh.
Tied up, 1 second left.
1 second.
Probably go.
Thank you.
Basketball game, national championship.
How much time is left?
1 second.
And they're tied 68-68.
You know, I was saying I never, if I'd chosen a different profession, I could have watched major sporting events.
Okay, do we have everybody back? Kelly, you ready to start back up again?
I am.
Ready?
We're on.
Call the meeting back to order. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell, members of the Planning Commission, Mike Robinson again on behalf of the applicant. So let me do my presentation.
Kelly.
This,
1 sec, sorry.
sure.
Are we not starting?
It says pause.
Oh, I thought it said. Okay, now are we going?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell, members of the Planning Commission, Mike Robinson again on behalf of the applicant. Let me do my presentation this way, and Parrish may have some testimony as well. I don't mean to exclude her. So with respect to condition of approval 22, which are the 3 bullet point easement requirements, I think we're comfortable with those. We read we emphasized that last sentence that explained that the vehicular easement can be modified or terminated when those 2 parcels redevelop if you don't need it any longer. As long as that's clear and we'll draft the easement that way, we don't have a problem with those easements. Let me talk about condition of approval 15. So it's clear from the evidence and the record. Well, let me tell you one thing that isn't clear, and then I'll tell you what I believe is clear. It's and again, we appreciate John's help with this. The supplemental, the clarification provided by Mr. Lewis says on the second page, last sentence, this work can occur without undergrounding, without impacts to neighboring frontage, can be done in the existing right-of-way is a standard requirement, and the cost to underground would be proportional to proposed development. There's no evidence in the record about what it's going to cost to underground or what the cost of the development is. So you don't actually have any evidence to make a proportional finding. I appreciate what John is saying, but think about this from a practical standpoint. It is a single family dwelling. It's not proposed to be redeveloped as part of this application. If we underground it, if we're spending $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000, all of that money is going to be lost because when it's redeveloped as commercial or some other use, all that is going to go away. You're just going to tear it out and start over. I appreciate John's viewpoint. I hardly ever find myself in disagreement with Mr. Lewis, but I think this is a case where the Planning Commission should say, instead of the recommended condition of approval, undergrounding of the service line is required when the use changes from a single-family residential use or the property is redeveloped. That's the appropriate time to underground. Otherwise, we're just spending money for no real purpose. And I certainly understand the city's desire, but nothing's happening to this house. If you're driving down Malala, you wouldn't really even know that anything had changed. So we would accept a condition of approval that's modified to say that the service line from the overhead lines back to the house shall be undergrounded when the use has changed from single-family dwelling use or when the property is redeveloped. So let me then, in my third part of the rebuttal, talk about the three folks who testified tonight. And I apologize, I didn't get the name of the woman who owns the properties to the south, but let me make 2 points. And I think one of the planning commissioners made this point. We're proposing this parking lot to be used for employees, not visitors. These are folks who are going to come to this parking lot day in and day out. There's no reason for them to drive through someone else's property. They know that to reach the parking lot on parcel 1, that they need to use Myrtle. And if someone does go through their property, there are ways to deal with that. You send a letter to the property owner saying, please tell your employees, your tenants, not to drive through our parking lot. So I don't see that as an impact of this application on that adjacent property. Secondly, she asked for a barrier to be installed on what's the common property line. You can't do that. The testimony, and if you look at the aerial, the driveway serving her property is split by the property line. So if you put a barrier in there, you wouldn't be able to effectively use that driveway to Malala. And there is a right, apparently, for the owner of the existing parcel, and this will be parcel 2 after the partition is approved, there's apparently a right for them to cross the property at 212 Malala Avenue. We didn't hear anyone say they didn't have a right. If it's been going on for more than 10 years, a prescriptive easement may exist. But the point is, that's what's going on now. You can't put a barrier there, and there's really no need to because the parking lot on parcel 1 is going to be used by employees, not by customers. And if I get the name wrong, my apologies. Mrs. Selman Pillarjay said that she had a potential buyer for parcel 2. I think there are 2 responses to that. First of all, that's not really relevant to any approval criteria that's before this planning commission. And the use of the dwelling on parcel 2 really isn't before the planning commission. But as Laura said, if you want to do something else, you have to have parking. And your use of that structure is going to be limited by whether you can meet the off-street parking requirement. There's no off-street parking requirement for the residential use. It's a non-conforming use. It can remain. But if it's redeveloped to a different use, then you have to meet whatever the off-street parking requirements are, and that's when parking will be triggered. But I don't think the issue of how the dwelling will be used is really relevant to the decision that this commission has to make. And Mrs. Lewis talked about the use of the parking lot off Malala Avenue to reach parcel 2. That partition doesn't change partition does not change whatever legal rights exist now. So if the owner of the parcel, including parcel 2, has the right to traverse 212 Malala, that continues. This partition doesn't change that. I was trying to see if there was anything else that would be helpful to you. So I think we certainly agree with the staff recommendation for approval. We agree with all of the conditions with the exception of 15. And we think 15, the fair way to deal with 15 is to simply require the undergrounding when the use changes or when parcel 2 is redeveloped. Then it's appropriate. I think there's a much better case to be made that the cost is proportional to the impact. So Mr. Mitchell, that's all I have. We would ask that you approve the application with the modified condition of approval 15. And I want to ask Parrish if she has something additional to add.
Thank you, Mike. You did a great job at addressing a lot of the questions that were brought up. The one clarification that I will add is that the asphalt paving area that has been utilized for parking for the house is remaining the way the land division is proposed. So the area that has been used for the parking of 2 or 3 vehicles for that single family house will still have that same area on the site associated with the house on parcel 2 under this.
Before Mike leaves, can we put up the other map? I want to hear what, you said something about the partition or the barrier would block the access to 212. Sure. Put that up. I wanted to see the arrow map for that. Chair
Mitchell, by the way, we waive our right to final written argument. And if you have questions of us, please ask before you close the record. So Commissioner Guile, if I understood what the owner of the property to the south was saying, she wanted a barrier along the common property line, which is the lower red line. But what Parrish was pointing out is it's all paved. There's the driveway to Malala. You can't really put a barrier in that would effectively, and based on what I've heard tonight and what I'm looking at, I'm not even sure a barrier would be legal, but you can't put it in without disrupting how one would use that driveway on Malala.
The curb cut begins on the property of 202.
Right.
The single family residence actually has the start of that curb cut on the property.
Curb cut, yes. From 202 down to almost 2.
You're pointing to the area on the west side of Malala below 202, correct?
Yeah, is that all curb cut there?
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
So she'd still have access?
I think it would, I cannot imagine putting a barrier into the middle of a driveway. I don't think I've ever seen that happen. And as a practical matter, the conditions the planning department has recommended to the planning commission don't provide for a physical connection between the parking lot on parcel 1 and the property to the south. And remember, it's employees. If you were using it for visitors who every time someone pulls in, maybe you have an issue, but employees can be told by their employer not to go on someone else's property and how to reach the parking lot, and that's quite effective. Oh, one other point. Mrs. Lewis, or maybe I'm wrong about who requested it, asked for lighting. I don't think you want lighting back there. If you have lighting back there, you're only going to encourage people to use it in the evening who aren't employees. So in fact, I think the parking lot without lighting makes more sense in terms of not creating issues. That's all we have, and we appreciate your time tonight, and we hope you'll approve this with modified condition of approval 15.
Any questions for the applicant before the?
I had a couple quick ones. The temporary barrier between parcel 1 and parcel 2, when does that get removed?
That gets removed under the first bullet point under condition of approval 22 when parcel 2 is redeveloped.
Is that so the person that parks in the eastmost parking spot can back out? Well,
it's so that there can be reciprocal. It's so that there can be reciprocal. If you heard Kelly say your code 17.62 requires reciprocal access.
But it's residential now. The 202 is residential now. So.
Right.
They wouldn't have to allow access.
That's exactly right. But the condition says when it's redeveloped and the barrier goes away.
I was just wondering if that last spot would be able to back out. It seems kind of tight.
Can we see that last one again?
The parking spot's 16 feet long, and then there's 22 feet behind it.
I'll let Parrish answer. You're talking about maneuvering.
We did ask that question, and Jimmy Hoff is the civil engineer, and he looked at it to verify it. Yeah, it would be tight, but in his assessment, it was feasible for. It was feasible for you have a 22-foot wide drive aisle to back out, and then you'd probably have to do like a 2-point turn.
Okay, and then the last question I had was, if you decided you needed lighting and the underground wiring wasn't required, how would they get power later if they decided it was necessary?
We'd have to underground it.
You'd have to
install new, yeah.
Yeah, we'd take a look. They would submit a type 1 site plan design review.
Couldn't just run a cable
that
from
we would
the
take a look at. And we would make sure it complies with all our criteria.
A lot more than extension cord.
It'd be cheaper.
One other consideration. And that's, the whole country goes on daylight savings time. It gets dark around in the Northwest about 3:30 or 4, so that lot for people exiting 5 o'clock, if that's how long they work, that's gonna be dark back there at that time.
Well,
Just
there
a thought.
could be solar LED lights too, there's.
Commissioner Gall, that's a good point. I guess most of us in Oregon learned to deal with that in December. I mean, your point's well taken.
It's just a back parking lot, that's my consideration.
Anything else for the applicant?
I'm done.
I have one more before you close the record. Staff would like to request a continuance for 2 weeks from today so we could look at providing additional information regarding the cost of the overhead utility lines.
So not having had that request before, is that something that the commission votes on,
Yes.
whether or not to allow? Okay.
Yeah.
Can we do that now?
So,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to, so if a party other than the applicant requests the continuance, the clock is not extended. And if the commission would allow, I'm going to withdraw my waiver of the final written argument, because now that we're going to keep the record open, we might well waive it later on. But since I didn't know staff was going to ask for the hearing to be, Laura, are you asking for the hearing to be continued or the written record held open? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Hearing,
But there were one other thing.
I mean, are you gonna do?
It's not on.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're requesting continuance till the 22nd, and just that the record be held open, and then you'll come back for deliberation on the 22nd.
I'm sorry, you're requesting a continuance to the 22nd, or it sounds like you want to hold the written record open, close the public hearing, hold the written record open?
Yes.
And so I'm sorry, what are you proposing with respect to the record times, Bill?
I apologize, we haven't had a chance to talk through this, so.
You can.
So, I guess, I'm gonna, and Laura can correct me if I'm wrong, we have two different options. You know, whenever somebody asks for the record to be left open, there are two options. One is to continue the public hearing, come back and let people introduce additional evidence, and then you close the hearing at that next meeting. Alternatively, you can close the public hearing, you won't hear any more public testimony, but you'll get written materials. And when that's done, typically you get 7 days for anybody to submit written materials, then 7 days for anybody to submit rebuttal to that evidence, and then 7 days for the applicant to submit final written argument, which would mean that the hearing wouldn't be 2 weeks from today, but it would be 4 weeks, the first meeting in in May. Ideally, the written just leaving the written record open is easier because when you come back, you have all the material. All the evidence is in and you get to decide it. However, continuing the hearing to another hearing date is shorter because we can come back at the hearing 2 weeks from now. So I think, and Laura can tell me if I'm wrong, that the easier thing is probably to come back 2 weeks from today. And so we're asking that you continue the hearing, come back 2 weeks from today. The reason that planning staff is making this request is so that we can provide you with additional evidence as to the cost of underground. So,
Chair Mitchell, may I ask Bill a question?
Sure.
So if you want to continue the hearing, that's of course you're right. Are you going to, what is it I want to ask? Are you going to treat this as a new staff report? Because I don't want to get the new evidence the night of the hearing. Are you agreeing to provide the new evidence within 7 days of the continued hearing date?
I don't think we have an obligation to do so.
Well, I think it's a staff report.
It's a staff report, but the new evidence isn't a staff report, as you know.
Well,
I do think that we can get that to you well in advance.
Well, what is well, and I'd like the timeline to be.
Part of it is going to. Chair Mitchell, we're getting a little far afield, but certainly, The evidence we intend to provide is relatively limited and short. Partially, how soon we can get it to the planning commissioners is going to be dependent on how quick we can get it from the utility providers and other things. Ideally, we'd get it relatively quickly. We'd provide it to the planning commission as well as to the applicant or to anybody else and post it online. We just don't know until we have that conversation.
We'll strive to have it in the next agenda, which gets posted a week from today.
All right. Is that acceptable, Mike?
I trust Laura, John, and Bill, and if they're saying they'll do their best to have it in a week, that's fine with us.
Okay, then I move to approve it in the terminology. To continue to the date certain of the 22nd, is that what we decided on?
That's correct.
And that's based on the fact that I would still like to hear from John, from comments that Mike had made in his final rebuttal, because I was confused. He said no for the 15, and is that going to be considered? He doesn't want 15.
This is all about the undergrounding.
And not just the cost, but I'd like to hear from John too of why he feels it's important at this time. Because Mike seemed to think, or Mr. Robinson used to think that it shouldn't be included, and he wanted it.
I'm sorry, before you vote on this motion, would you give me just a second to step out in the hallway and ask my client a question? Do you mind?
If it'll help move us forward,
well,
go for it.
Yeah, just give us a couple of minutes if you wouldn't mind, Chairman.
Do you understand why I was asking that? Because he said something.
I think we're off record, so
Yeah.
Okay.
what I might suggest is you go have a
So
quick
we are
conversation with Mr.
temporarily
Lewis on
paused.
what you want to hear.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
And not. Go ask John. No, go ask him when he said.
Can I turn it on?
No, because everybody else can hear.
Procedural question, if, assuming that, or maybe I shouldn't ask this.
Yeah, let's wait till they come
I'll
back.
wait.
Sorry, pretty rare these come up late.
Pardon?
Normally, the procedure happens a little bit different when we request these things. Sorry, I was thinking you were saying you can hold it open just for one of the sides.
No. Oh.
Or just hold it.
Yeah, when somebody asks for amendments, we have two options.
This is 7-7?
Yeah, it's 777, it's just easier, because then if anybody comes in with new evidence, anybody can say, I want an opportunity to rebut to the 777.
I think that's what they are. I see.
This whole thing, that's gotta be really sure.
I was trying to put it into words, but wow.
What's the score?
I can't see it publicly, but I just have to.
We're paused.
I just have to put it in writing.
No, the game score.
Oh, it looks like
81-75, 16 seconds left. It looks like Virginia's gonna win.
Virginia?
It went overtime?
It went to overtime. Weirder things have happened, but it sure looks good for Virginia.
if the Ducks couldn't do it, no team can do it. So what I was asking John, the fact that Mr. Evans talked about
I can still get FaceTime without like.
the condition number 15, didn't give John a chance.
Don't worry, when they get to,
Explain to us what he-
18.
Mike Robinson on behalf of the applicant, thank you for taking a brief break. I think we've resolved this issue. I think staff is going to tell you, so we want to make sure that we can construct the parking lot and start using it before the undergrounding is done. And I think the condition allows us to do that, but I think staff is comfortable with Mr. Lewis explaining that. And by the way, thank you to your staff for working with us on that. And my understanding is, if they say that, we'll withdraw our objection to 15 as written, and then they will withdraw their request for a continuance. And I think you can make your decision tonight. We're all happy.
Mr. Lewis.
Good. You want me to say it?
Well, I'm actually saying it. So part of the discussion was about timing and when the undergrounding had to occur. And so, you know, the way the condition is written is that the undergrounding has to occur prior to the recordation of the final plat. This is a tentative approval of the plat, and then the final, they have 2 years in which to record that final plat. So essentially, if this approval goes through, if the commission were to approve it, they could build and construct the parking lot and use it and not underground for a year or two. So, you know, we don't know exactly how long they're going to do that, but, you know, as written, the condition only requires them to do it prior to final plat. And so there is some impetus for them to do that because they can't sell the property until the final plat is recorded. So, you know, I think they want to get the use of the parking lot done and then record, and that's consistent with the way the condition is written.
Okay, I have a question for you.
So with regard to parcel 2, it could not change use or change ownership without the undergrounding happening?
That's correct.
Okay.
Final plan.
Yeah, and then they can't change ownership until the final plat is recorded.
That was going to be my question. You can't change ownership of all until that underground?
You can change ownership of all, but you cannot sell a piece of land until it is partitioned or subdivided. So right now, the owner could sell the entire property, but he couldn't sell parcel 1 or parcel 2 separately until the final plat is complete.
And so, sorry to be a doubting Thomas, but that's my record, is so they could start this, they could sell the property within a year and they don't have to do the.
They cannot sell the property until the final plat is recorded.
Until the final plat, and that is a requirement to put those.
And the underground will be done before the final plat is recorded.
Okay.
So Mr. Mitchell, based on what Mr. Geisman said, we're fine with conditional approval 15 as clarified by Mr. Lewis, and then I understand staff will withdraw the request for the continuance, so you can close the hearing and record.
That is correct. We withdraw our request for continuance.
Okay.
I was trying to make a
And
motion.
you've withdrawn your objection to
Yes.
22 as well?
We're comfortable, yes, we're comfortable with 22.
22 as written?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Any other questions? Okay, so at this point, I close the public hearing, and we will deliberate. Comments? Mr. Mahoney?
I'm going to support the proposal with the conditions as modified according to the language of the city attorney, with the understanding that, from my point of view, that Molal Avenue is in a state of flux, and it's going to be in a state of flux for the next 20 years. And this proposed parceling of this property is part of that agenda, that flux that I'm talking about. My only objection to this is that the proposed parking lot isn't downtown Oregon City. That's where it belongs. There's where the parking's needed. Plus the fact that it's a public safety advantage to have employees have a off-street parking area. Reduces the traffic on Molal Avenue. It increases improvements on Myrtle Street. And according to the barrier, I mean, if the adjacent property owner wanted a barrier, there's nothing restricting her to put the barrier on her property. So I'm going to support this, and I hope the rest of the planning commission does too.
The only problem I have with that, Bob, I agree with almost everything except for the fact that somebody else's development, why is it the responsibility of a person who's been there for all these years to have to build that barrier? If that's what you wanted, you think that a development coming in would be responsible to do some division, and that same, like in any, like Park Place, Beaver Creek, if you're gonna put roads in and things like that, it seems to me the developer is responsible for those kind of
Tom, that
improvements.
proposed parcel 1 is not going to drive across her property, not with that landscape there.
Right.
On the south end.
Agreed. It's just the fact when I hear the idea that that's the responsibility of someone there, that I keep thinking when a developer wants to develop, they should pick up more of the costs of those things.
Well, I guess we'll agree to disagree on that.
Okay. Any other comments?
I guess I have one comment. I don't know how relevant it is, but I think it's more for staff. If they get the quote back from PGE and it's a ridiculous amount because there's a gas line and some kind of a salt cave and, you know, who knows? What if they got a quote for 100,000? It's not it wouldn't be reasonable for the project, right? At what point do you guys decide what's reasonable and what's not? Because what's the wording on that, the language in the code?
I think there is no wording for that on the code. I think should they go in and they find out that there is, you know, an impenetrable basalt barrier or there's something that's going to cause a collapse of Malala Avenue, the answer is to come back in and ask for an amendment to the minor petition.
Okay, that's possible.
I do think that there's enough development in this area that it seems unlikely that there's going to be a, you know, something like that. But certainly, you know, if there is a major problem, that's
It could be
answered.
amended? Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I worried about.
Somebody else had something?
Without adding any other little fine print or anything, I basically agree with the general moving forward with it tonight. And glad to hear from Bill that, you know, if there's disaster comes, there's relief to try and correct it without spending another hour and a half here tonight to figure out how the correction would work, because we don't even know the problem yet. So I'll support this.
Any other comments? I've got just a couple of things I just want to make sure for my own edification. There's nothing in our code that requires lighting in parking lots, correct?
There's nothing in our code that requires that parking lot stalls be lit. If there was a walkway through the parking lot, that would require lighting. So we only require lighting for certain things under today's code.
But there's not, so it's not triggered in this case.
So there's no walkway in between all those parking?
There's no pedestrian access way through
So you squeeze your way
parking
through
lot.
each little car to get to your car?
There's no like sidewalk through the parking lot itself. And then there is no
I don't want somebody scratching my
requirement
car.
for lighting on single family.
Okay, so there's no requirement. And then in the MUC zone where we are, there is no minimum lot size.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, there is none.
That's correct. You're correct.
Okay, well, I'll say I'm also going to support this. I think they did a good job of addressing the neighbors' concerns from the neighborhood association. And quite frankly, it's going to be an improvement to what's kind of an unsightly piece of ground right now. So that's my comments. Is there a motion? Or for any further discussion? Is there a motion?
Well, I'm going to move that application, what's the title of this, Laura?
GLUA 1901.
Get her to read it, right?
GLUA 1901.
GL 19 what?
GLUA 1901.
That's what I'm talking about. That one. Okay. Be approved according to city attorney's explanation of what the heck's going on.
With conditions.
That's the
I assume.
clearest move I've ever heard.
With the conditions, and then also with, pardon me for finishing off your motion.
I'm hoping.
With the amendment
To condition number 2.
to condition number 2, which was a typo in what came out originally. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Mahoney, seconded by Commissioner Gage. We need need to record everybody's individual votes, right?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm going to start.
Please call
at
the roll.
end. Commissioner Guile,
Based on the concerns I still have about lighting and divisions, I'm going to abstain. I don't disagree with it, I just can't totally agree with it, but I know it's going to go.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Gage,
Aye.
Chair Mitchell,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
and Commissioner Mahoney.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, we will adjourn the public meeting, and are we still going into the work session? Okay, so we'll adjourn the public meeting, or excuse me, adjourn the regular planning commission meeting.